The Galactic Council filled the chamber with confidence, their banners glowing, their voices promising peace, yet behind the polished words was the quiet certainty that Earth would kneel. The chamber itself was carved into the heart of a hollowed moon, the walls lined with crystals that shimmered with the light of distant stars. The air hummed with translation devices, carrying words across 100 languages, each one blending into a harmony meant to sound like unity. But behind the harmony lay calculation, and behind the calculation lay conquest. Delegates from ancient empires took their places with deliberate grace. The reptilian dynasties draped in scales of gold, the avian sovereigns spreading jeweled wings, the insectoid collectives clicking their mandibles in ritual rhythm. Their banners rose above them, shimmering with colors so bright they hurt the human eye. They filled the space with spectacle, as if to remind all who entered that age and tradition were their weapons. Council chamber was designed not for fairness, but for intimidation. The humans were placed at the far end upon a platform lower than the rest, a symbolic gesture that said much without words. Above them, statues of ancient conquerors loomed there, eyes carved in eternal judgment. The council members sat in elevated circles, as though they looked down upon children, awaiting instruction. The council began their performance. One by one, their voices echoing through the chamber. The avian sovereign spoke of peace treaties carried through generations, a fabric of stability that stretched across the stars. They declared that humanity should be grateful to be invited into such legacy. The reptilian dynasties hissed of balance and prosperity, a future where Earth would flourish under coalition guidance. They spoke with conviction, but their words dripped with ownership. Applause filled the chamber as each delegate finished, the sound rolling like thunder through the moon. Humans were expected to be impressed, to be humbled, but instead the human envoys sat in silence, their eyes forward, their hands unmoving, their expressions calm. This silence unsettled the younger delegates, who whispered to one another behind their hands, asking why the humans did not respond. Yet the elder powers saw silence as weakness. They mistook stillness for hesitation. Their laughter crept into the edges of the chamber, though their words remained polished. Their minds already celebrated victory. They believed humanity was cornered, a young race from a single world, unable to resist the weight of civilizations older than its first cities. As the speeches continued, gifts were unveiled, artifacts of conquered worlds placed upon tables before the humans, relics from forgotten ages presented as symbols of generosity. Jewels glimmered in the artificial light, metal forged in suns long dead, shaped into crowns and ornaments. They offered these treasures as if peace could be bought with glitter and history. But within every word and within every gesture, the truth was clear. The council did not gather to negotiate. They gathered to dictate. They asked for peace, but it was not the peace of equals. It was the peace of rulers speaking to subjects. It was the peace of chains offered in silk wrappings. The humans listened quietly, but deep within the silence something far stronger was stirring. They spoke of treaties and alliances, their words woven with kindness, yet heavy with the weight of domination. The first delegate rose, tall and cloaked in fabric woven with stars from his own system. His voice rolled like thunder through the chamber, carried on the translator's smooth tone. He spoke of unity, of shared prosperity, of an end to war. He promised trade routes and cultural exchanges, gifts of knowledge and science. But beneath every phrase lurked the promise of ownership. Earth would gain access to galactic wealth only if it surrendered its independence. Another followed her, feathers radiant with light shimmering across the ceiling. She spread her wings in a display of grandeur, and her tone softened into something almost maternal. She said humanity had struggled long enough alone, that it had proven its spirit but lacked wisdom. She offered guidance from civilizations that had walked among the stars since before human ancestors first lit fire. She promised protection, but in that word protection was the shadow of control. The insectoid envoy spoke next, his mandibles clicking in rapid sequence. The translator poured out a chorus of words that sounded almost like poetry. He spoke of cooperation, of joining the collective. Willie declared that humanity's individuality was reckless, that unification under the coalition would end division forever. His words painted a picture of peace, but his eyes glowed with hunger for assimilation. One by one, the voices built upon each other like a rising storm, each speaker presenting a vision of peace that looked bright on the surface, but beneath shimmered with chains. They spoke of treaties that bound planets for millennia, contracts that exchanged freedom for stability. They smiled as if bestowing blessings while drafting sentences that would strip Earth of its sovereignty. The hall echoed with their rehearsed compassion, their hands lifted in grand gestures. Their banners swayed gently above them, like rivers of color, shimmering with false hope, each phrase timed to perfection, each pause delivered with dramatic weight. The audience of lesser envoys applauded again and again, convinced they were witnessing history, a new species welcomed into eternal peace. But in truth, there was no choice on the table, only submission wrapped in ritual. Every clause of every treaty was carved from the same stone. Humanity would surrender its fleets, its industries, its governance in exchange for protection from the very powers demanding its obedience. It was not diplomacy, it was annexation draped in silta. Council leaders congratulated themselves as they spoke, certain that the humans would be moved by the pageantry, certain that the promises of wealth and longevity would soften their resolve. They looked at humanity and saw only a fragile world, desperate to survive. Among giants, the human envoys remained silent. They offered no nods, no smiles, no gestures of approval. Their stillness unsettled some in the chamber. Yet the council dismissed it with laughter, claiming it was awe or hesitation. They could not imagine that silence might mean something else. They could not imagine that behind the calm faces of the humans lay a will forged and fired. The speeches ended. In a wave of applause and self-congratulation, the banners shimmered. The delegates bowed to one another, the gifts glittered in the artificial starlight. They asked for peace, but in truth what they demanded was surrender, and they believed the matter was already decided. The human envoys sat in silence, their faces calm, their hands recording every word they offered. No protest, no agreement, only silence. And that silence unsettled the chamber more than anger ever could. The lead human delegate sat at the front, a woman whose gaze was steady as stone, her uniform simple, without jewels, without banners, her posture sharp and unmoving. Her presence seemed small compared to the towering robes and radiant wings around her, yet the stillness she carried drew more attention than the speeches that filled the air. Every time her eyes lifted toward the council, a ripple of unease spread across the chamber. She and her team carried no gifts, no relics, no offerings. Instead, small devices rested in their hands, glowing faintly, as they recorded every sound, every motion, every flicker of arrogance that slipped into the voices of the speakers. The delegates knew they were being studied, and this unsettled them, for they were used to species begging for favor, not species that listened without response. One delegate attempted to break the silence, leaning forward with a smile, his voice dripping with forced warmth. He asked the human envoy what they thought of the treaties presented. He expected gratitude, or at least polite acknowledgement, but she only inclined her head slightly and made another note. Without a word, the silence was louder than any protest. Whispers began to spread among the younger envoys, their jeweled robes rustling as they leaned toward each other, asking if humanity was offended, asking if perhaps they were plotting something. Yet the elder powers dismissed these fears. They told the chamber that the humans were overwhelmed, that they simply did not yet understand the honor that was being offered. Laughter followed their reassurance, but that laughter rang hollow in the vaulted chamber. The silence became heavier with each passing speech. The humans nodded, occasionally, but never smiled, never fidgeted, never showed the slightest sign of weakness. The more they remained unmoving, the more the coalition grew irritated. Speeches that were meant to impress began to sound rehearsed, even desperate. The envoys raised their voices higher, spread their wings wider, hissed their syllables sharper, but the humans remained still. Was not the silence of fear, it was the silence of endurance, the silence of a people who had already chosen their path far away from this chamber, a people who had already decided that no treaty, no alliance, no decorated speech could sway them. The silence was not hesitation, it was a weapon sharpened to cut through arrogance. Some guards posted along the walls felt it more than the envoys did. Their eyes shifted toward the humans, and a small weight pressed into their chests as if they were staring not at emissaries, but at soldiers in disguise. They whispered among themselves but dared not speak too loudly for fear of being silenced by their commanders. When the final speech ended, the humans stood together. They bowed formally, without words, their faces unbroken, masks of calm. Then they turned and departed, leaving behind a chamber filled with whispers and unease. The council interpreted their quiet as indecision, but in truth the silence was the sound of resolve, a resolve that would soon burn brighter than any star on earth. The truth was already carved into stone. Leaders had chosen not compromise but resistance. Survival was the only path, and every citizen would carry the burden. Together, while the council filled the chamber with promises of peace, Earth's skies thundered with the roar of engines, factories blazed with fire, and steel shipyards stretched into orbit like titans, reaching for the stars. Decisions had been made behind closed doors months Before the envoys even left for the council halls, humanity had listened to the first messages of peace, and already seen through the masked governments of Earth, fractured for centuries now, stood aligned under a single banner. The banner of survival. Borders lost their meaning as the threat beyond the stars united enemies into allies. The oceans carried convoys of resources across the globe. Deserts bloomed with industry. Frozen tundras cracked open to reveal hidden facilities. Every nation gave what it had, and no nation stood apart. Factories once meant for commerce now forged weapons of war. Assembly lines that had built cars and machines now birthed engines of dreadnoughts. Welders. Sparks lit up the nights of every city. The sound of hammers and drills became the heartbeat of humanity. Even the smallest towns felt the pulse as their people sent steel and labor to the cost. Children walked past towering posters that showed the fleet under construction, their eyes wide with wonder. Soldiers marched through city streets not to intimidate, but to inspire. The people waved as they passed, knowing every step was a promise that humanity would never kneel. Scientists worked without sleep, designing new engines, new weapons, new shields. Entire academies devoted themselves to transforming knowledge into survival. The human leaders gathered in underground chambers, away from satellites and spies. They spoke not of surrender but of time. How much could be gained, how much could be built before the council demanded an answer. They spoke of sacrifice, openly knowing that what was asked of their people was beyond anything in history. But no voice faltered, for they all understood the cost of submission was greater. Across the oceans, the great shipyards rose into the skies, metal skeletons of leviathans stretching like mountains above the seas. Cranes moved like giants across steel ribs, welding the bones of warships together. Each day another hull completed. Each night another engine roared to life. The stars above reflected on the steel below as if the heavens themselves witnessed the birth of defiance. Yet secrecy was kept with ruthless precision. The council spies saw little more than the surface. Their reports spoke of hesitation, of arguments, of governments too fractured to resist. This was the image humanity crafted deliberately while in the shadows. The fleet grew faster, stronger, more immense with every passing day. The people of Earth whispered to one another in streets and markets, not of fear but of determination. They shared stories of ancient wars, of times when humanity stood against impossible odds, and still endured. They believed in their silence. They believed in their strength. They believed that when the time came, Earth would not bow but rise. Factories thundered, cities shook, shipyards lit the sky with fire. As leviathans of steel were born, one after another, the roar of industry became the heartbeat of humanity. United in defiance across the continents, workers labored tirelessly day and night. Sparks flying from welding torches, molten metal flowing like rivers across assembly lines. Massive engines lifted from floors by cranes, the sound of machinery. A constant symphony of creation, each rivet, each bolt, each panel laid with precision and care, as if the very future of humanity depended on their hands in orbit. Orbital shipyards stretched over hundreds of kilometers, scaffolding wrapped around the hulls of colossal ships. Engineers and drones moved in perfect coordination, every weld measured, every conduit placed with millimeter precision. Massive dreadnoughts, carriers and cruisers rose from the void like mountains emerging from mist, their weapons bristling like the teeth of a predator ready to strike. Fuel refineries worked around the clock, producing the energy that would power the engines of humanity's armada. New alloys were smelted in floating forges, metals never before combined in experiments that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge. The scientists and engineers labored with exhaustion etched on their faces, yet determination burning brighter than any. Nuzivi Fleet Command Center hummed with activity. Officers charted simulations, plotting trajectories, weapons, fire tactics and strategies. Every scenario considered, tested, repeated. The human mind worked faster than machines, processing the endless possibilities of combat against foes who had dominated the stars for millennia. They studied every record of coalition battles, searching for weaknesses, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Training grounds on land and sea became crucibles of endurance. Entire generations marched through exercises, drills, maneuvers, learning to operate the leviathans. They would one day command entire fleets, synchronized with fighters and bombers, with sensors and shields, their bodies and minds sharpened for the unknown war. Ahead of them, the civilians participated in subtle ways, providing materials, maintaining supply lines, working in communications, monitoring satellites. ensuring that no signal of weakness would ever escape their planet. Every citizen understood that survival was a shared burden. No one could falter, no one could delay in the skies above Earth. Test flights roared, engines tearing through clouds, ships glimmering in sunlight and moonlight simultaneously. Pilots maneuvered through simulated combat, engaging invisible foes. The human response time was honed to perfection. The weapons, systems tuned with deadly precision, every system calibrated ready to unleash devastation despite the massive scale of the operation. Secrecy was absolute. No coalition sensor penetrated the shrouded fleets. No envoy detected the growth of the human armada. The Council believed the humans hesitant. They believed that Earth would submit when called. They were unaware that patience had been the mask of preparation, that humanity was already prepared to answer aggression with fire. As the first completed dreadnoughts drifted in formation above the planet, their shadows stretching across the continents below, the people of Earth watched in silence, knowing that soon their message would reach the stars, not in words, not in pleas, but in the language of power and defiance. The Council laughed at humanity's silence, calling it hesitation, unaware that hesitation was the mask of determination. Across the glittering halls of the neutral station, the delegates whispered to one another, their voices tinged with amusement. They spoke of humans as children, untested and naive. They laughed at the simplicity of the envoys who had sat silently through speeches, believing that their lack of response was fear. They could not imagine patience as a weapon. Elder powers nodded in agreement, confident that victory was assured. The avian sovereigns spread jeweled wings and cooed with condescension. The reptilian dynasties hissed in delight at their cleverness. The insectoid leaders clicked their mandibles and offered nods of approval, all certain that Earth would finally bend under the weight of history and experience. Reports from distant observation posts described the vast factories, the expanding shipyards, the hundreds of fleets moving in secret, but the Council dismissed them as exaggerations, rumors spread by nervous scouts. They reminded themselves that humans were slow to act, untrained, weak. They assumed that any display was only a bluff or a distraction, nothing more. Inside the grand halls, the delegates rehearsed their triumphs, already imagining the celebrations, the treaties signed, the banners raised across coalition worlds to mark humanity's submission. They debated which civilizations would gain control of Earth's industries, which families would inherit positions of power, while humanity remained a silent observer across the void. Meanwhile, human envoys continued their quiet work, recording every gesture, every word, every flicker of arrogance. Without responding, their stillness grew heavier in the minds of the Council, their faces calm, their eyes sharp, their pens capturing every move like a silent army observing its enemy. The Council mistook it for hesitation and pride, and so they laughed even louder. The guards stationed along the walls shifted nervously, their hands lingering on hilts. They noticed the calmness of the humans, something unnerving in the lack of reaction. Their training had never prepared them for this stillness. They whispered quietly, yet no one wanted to acknowledge the unease openly for fear of being ridiculed or scolded by their commanders. Every plan the Council made was built on the assumption that humans would eventually speak, that submission would follow, that their silence was a temporary pause before pleading began. They believed their fleets outnumbered any potential human forces. Their experience assured them that no young race could resist the weight of the coalition. Yet even as they laughed and celebrated, an uneasy tension began to creep into their calculations. Unknown to the Council, the human patience was not weakness, it was deliberate strategy. The fleets were growing every day, ships moving silently into formation, weapons systems, calibrated training completed their calm envoys. A perfect mask, hiding a storm, ready to erupt in fire and steel. The Council remained blind to the truth, confident in its superiority, certain that the humans were yet to be broken. But beyond the hall, beyond the laughter, beyond the arrogance, a force waited, poised, ready to strike, a force that would teach the galaxy the price of underestimating those who had endured and would endure again. The appointed day arrived. The coalition fleets stretched across the stars, a wall of arrogance, their weapons gleaming, their admirals smiling, certain humanity would come to sign its surrender. From orbiting command stations, reports poured in. Every cruiser, every battleship, every fighter accounted for. The coalition had prepared meticulously for this moment. Decades of planning and resources poured into a single purpose: to intimidate, to coerce, to ensure that Earth would bow without resistance. The stars themselves seemed to glitter in anticipation of victory. The human envoys departed silently from the chambers on the neutral station, their steps measured, their faces calm, no words spoken, no gestures, made the council watched expecting, hesitation, expecting, pleading. Instead, the humans moved with quiet purpose, and that silence sent a ripple of uncertainty through even the oldest delegates. Across the void, massive engines flared to life, the coalition fleets aligned into formations, so precise they resembled constellations. The warships glimmered under the light of distant suns, their weapons ready, their shields active, the admirals on bridge decks drank the illusion of certainty like wine. They believed the humans had no power to oppose them. Meanwhile, on Earth, the last preparations were completed. Enormous leviathans of steel were deployed into orbit, their shadows stretching across continents. A fleet unparalleled in human history, awaiting the signal that would carry it across the stars. The engines hummed with quiet menace, their energy core pulses like a heartbeat counting down toward the moment of release. Pilots, trained for years, checked their systems one last time, simulations repeated over and over, drilling instincts to perfection. Every crew member knew their role, their responsibilities, their place in the symphony of destruction that was to come. The silence of anticipation was thicker than any battle cry, the calm before the storm, palpable even to distant observers. The coalition grew impatient, their messages sent across subspace demanded an answer. Earth must respond. The council convened to discuss what they assumed would be the final surrender, yet all the communication lines were silent. There were no replies, no negotiation, no plea, nothing to satisfy the centuries of expectation. Their confidence began to ripple with uncertainties. The first hours passed, the humans still did not respond. The coalition fleets waited, their engines humming in the dark. The commanders exchanged nervous glances, assuming miscommunication, yet deep down, a seed of doubt began to take root. How could a species so small remain so silent, so composed in the face of overwhelming power? Then sensors picked up the first signs of movement, subtle at first, ships drifting in formation like shadows, shifting across starlight. The coalition studied them, thinking them minor maneuvers, but the drift became alignment, the alignment became structure, and the structure revealed intent, and the intent was unmistakable. The human fleet emerged from the darkness of space, immense in scale, precise in formation, engines blazing. The ships glimmered like metal suns as far as the eye could see, every cruiser, every battleship, every fighter moving as one. The coalition felt the first true stirrings of fear, a chill that ran through halls, designed to instill confidence. The council whispered to one another, trying to convince themselves it was a bluff, yet every sensor screamed truth. Humanity had come prepared, not to negotiate, but to fight, not to bow, but to unleash a force the galaxy had never witnessed before. And in that moment, certainty shattered into awe and terror. Then the stars themselves seemed to vanish as the human fleet emerged. Dreadnoughts, engines blazing, cruisers in perfect formation, firepower so vast that the very station trembled under their arrival. Every sensor in the coalition fleets flared alarms, lights blinking wildly, systems straining to calculate the scale, the sheer size, the unprecedented coordination. The humans had hidden their strength for decades. Every observer felt the weight of 1,000 suns pressing against their senses. The silence of the human envoys now became a roar, louder than any battle cry. The leviathans moved with grace that belied their immense size, their hulls shimmering with defensive layers previously unknown. The engines glowed with the power to rend planets. From orbit, the smaller ships darted between giants, weaving an intricate web of firepower, precision, and menace. Each pilot knowing their place, each officer aware of the choreography perfected over years of preparation. The coalition admirals stood on their bridge decks, mouths open, hearts hammering the maps, and holograms displaying the human formation in real time. Their weapons systems reassessing calculations over and over, as the probability of success against this fleet plummeted into impossibility. Even the oldest generals, whose lives had seen centuries of conquest, felt a fear that had no name. Every star in the surrounding systems seemed to flicker, as if the universe itself paused to watch humanity step from shadows into the center of reckoning. The council scrambled to send messages, to recall fleets, to adjust formations, to regroup, but every maneuver was already anticipated. Humanity had studied every known tactic, every pattern, every weakness of the coalition, and had built a response ready before the first peace envoy ever boarded their Amazon. The bridges of human dreadnoughts, the crews were calm, their eyes focused, hands steady. The quiet discipline of preparation replaced any hesitation or fear there. Unity became palpable, a force not just of metal and firepower but of will and determination, the aura of purpose radiated outward like waves rippling through space toward the coalition fleets. The first warning shots were unnecessary, for the visual impact alone shattered the Council's arrogance. The very sight of these human leviathans defied centuries of assumption of weakness. The banners of the Council faded against the glimmering tide of earth, steel, and fire. The vastness of the human armada swallowed the stars themselves, and yet still they advanced with terrifying precision. Every coalition envoy began to whisper warnings, their confidence melting into disbelief. No one could deny what they saw, what they calculated, what they felt. The humans were no longer negotiators, no longer envoys, no longer subjects of fate. The humans were a storm in formation, a reckoning in motion, and the silence that had unnerved them in chambers now roared across the void, louder than any. Earth's fleet moved into position. The Council realized their mistake, the centuries of arrogance, the assumption of weakness, the laughter at silence, the dismissal of human patience, all of it crumbled in an instant, replaced by the raw realization that the galaxy had underestimated humanity, and that underestimation would be the death of certainty, and perhaps the end of an age. The Council scrambled across their chambers, voices rising, panic and disbelief. Echoing through halls that had never known uncertainty, they sent urgent messages across subspace, pleading for negotiation, for delay, for mercy, but the humans did not respond. Their silence now was not hesitation, it was intent. From the orbit of Earth, the human fleet spread like a tide of steel across the void. Immense ships, dwarfing the largest coalition. Dreadnoughts, weapons charged, engines glowing, ready to unleash devastation. At the precise moment chosen by those who had waited and prepared for decades, every captain and crew member poised with the knowledge that their resolve would be the deciding factor of history's. Signals of desperation arrived from the coalition admirals, begging for dialogue, offering concessions, promising peace, but the humans did not waver. Not a word, not a signal, not a hesitation. Their fleet advanced as one unstoppable force, a living testament to preparation, patience, and the refusal to bow. From the bridges of the largest dreadnoughts, commanders observed the Council fleets, shifting nervously, uncertain of how to respond, their formations faltering, calculations failing, every attempt to anticipate the humans' movements. They realized the truth, too late. The humans had anticipated every scenario, every potential weakness, and built a response that could not be countered. Across the coalition fleet's panic spread like wildfire. Officers shouted orders that could not be executed. Sensors failed to detect the full scale of the human armada. Smaller ships darted among the giants, their speed and precision unmatched. Every volley of simulated fire in training drills, now real and lethal. Every human ship a predator, hunting in perfect coordination. The first weapons discharged a warning, and the void was illuminated with fire. Nothing reckless, nothing chaotic. Each shot precise, deliberate, overwhelming, showing not just power but control. The Council reeled as one world after another felt the impact of human engineering and strategy. There was no room for negotiation. Now only the consequences of underestimation. In the halls of the Council, banners were lowered, voices hushed, some wept, some trembled, while the humans continued their advance, unmoving, unyielding. The silence of decades finally broken, not with words but with action. The response that had been prepared in secret finally revealed to a galaxy that had laughed at the stillness of envoys. Humanity answered not with begging, not with compromise, not with retreat, but with the unmistakable declaration of fire and force, a statement that would echo across the stars, that survival was not a request, it was a demand that would be enforced with every ship, every crew, every weapon. Humanity had prepared for this moment, every strategy, every calculation, every sacrifice, realized in a single unstoppable tide of power. The coalition could only watch, as their centuries of dominance crumbled against the overwhelming might of a species they had underestimated, a species that had endured every expectation, every slight, every dismissal, and now responded with the fire of 1,000 engines. The roar of metal and plasma sweeping across the void. The galaxy would remember this day for eternity, the day humanity answered silence with fire. The stars themselves seemed to burn brighter as the first volleys struck the Council fleets, and humanity moved forward, unflinching, unyielding. The answer was complete, the message clear and unmistakable. They had asked for peace, and humanity had answered with fire.